Well, welcome back to the program. Joining us now is CEO of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Ryvchin. Alex, thanks for joining us tonight. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to hit every target inside Iran. Meanwhile, Iran has killed 10 and injured hundreds in retaliatory strikes against Israel. I wanted to ask you first up, where do you see this war heading?
Well, Israel has a very clear mission here, which is to decapitate Iran's nuclear program, to arrive at a point where Iran can no longer essentially form an existential threat to Israel's survival. We've seen for a period of about 20 years the US and its allies, and Israel in particular through covert means, seeking to stall or delay Iran's progression to a nuclear bomb, through cyber attacks, through various targeted attacks on nuclear scientists and sites. And they reached a point, and this was verified by the UN's own atomic agency, that Iran was in violation of its own agreements and that it was proceeding towards a nuclear weapon. So Israel's aim is very clear. There's been a lot of talk about the potential for regime change. I think that's something that would obviously make the region and the world a far safer place and bring respite to the people of Iran and its diaspora throughout the world, which overwhelmingly loathes that regime and wants to see it fall and wants to see Iran become a modern, prosperous and peaceful country once again. But that's beyond the remit of what Israel is seeking to achieve. It's about restoring its own security and preserving the existence of the state for generations to come.
Yeah, well, just on that point about regime change, Iran has now shut off the internet domestically, and we've seen videos emerging on social media of Iranians celebrating Israel's attack on the regime, because as you say, they themselves are also being held hostage essentially by this Islamic terrorist regime. But how likely do you think it is that we will see regime change in Iran?
Look, it's difficult to know, but what we do understand is that since 1979, the regime has completely entrenched itself into all aspects of Iranian society. We know that when there was a green revolution, an uprising in 2009, it was brutally suppressed, largely through an internal militia, which does the bidding of the regime. The IRGC is incredibly powerful. I think in countries like this and throughout the Middle East, it ultimately comes down to who has the support of the military. As long as the regime is backed by the military, it will retain its power. But if that should change, then there may be the capacity for a popular uprising. But this is something obviously that has to be initiated by the people. But we all in the West, and as I said, particularly the Iranian diaspora, look on with anticipation and hope of a better future, primarily for Iranians, because they've suffered for too long under the repression of this brutal regime.
Alex, we spoke earlier about Penny Wong calling for restraint and de-escalation. Do you agree with Israel's ambassador to Australia that our foreign minister is naive? Alexander Downer put it even more bluntly in The Australian. He wrote that, quote, only a diplomatic child, unquote, could question Israel's action to defend themselves against this nuclear threat.
Look, the foreign minister, like all of us, wants to see de-escalation, a resumption of calm. But calm by Australian standards and by Israeli standards are two very different things. We're a long way away. We're not in the immediate periphery and purview of the Iranian regime and its nuclear program and its ballistic weapons and all of the disorder and chaos that it sows throughout the Middle East. From Israel's point of view, it can't afford to wait. It can't afford to take a chance and see how things play out because its very existence is at stake. And when it knows through its intel that Iran is potentially weeks away from a nuclear breakout, a point which can never be wound back, it has to act. And all Western governments and the UN agree that Iran cannot be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon. But what they don't propose, what they don't talk about is how that's going to be stopped. And we all know perfectly well, it's clear that Iran has used negotiations, has used the specter of a diplomatic process to reap sanctions relief, to embed itself deeper in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, to enforce itself even more brutally in its own country. And only force will stop this regime. And that's something which the Trump administration clearly came to understand through its own negotiations with the Iranians, that they weren't serious, they weren't acting in good faith. And this is what Israel has had to do. And it does so not only for its own survival, but for the interests of the West.
A convoy of anti-Israel activists have been detained and deported from Egypt while attempting to march into Gaza on foot. The locals were not too happy about their presence. Check this out. were shocked that Egypt didn't want them there. But since October 7, Egypt has refused to take in refugees from Gaza. And now they seem to be taking a harder line against pro-Palestinian activists than we do in the West. What do they know that we don't?
Well, they clearly know a great deal, because in the West, we're always so keen to indulge these people, to placate them, to rehabilitate them as being some sort of peace activists. But they're on the Egyptian border. They know exactly what they're dealing with. They know full well what the Muslim Brotherhood is, that this is a group that sows discord and almost ripped the country of Egypt apart multiple times. It sought to assassinate its presidents, and that Hamas is the Palestinian offshoot of that group. This is a group that is banned in Egypt. So they know that these Westerners who dress up in their kafirs and try to live out their Che Guevara fantasies, they claim to be peace activists, but these people know well that these are Hamas supporters, and they don't want a part of it. They've seen what Palestinian militants have done to neighboring countries like Jordan and Lebanon, have torn those countries apart and plunged them into civil war. And in contrast, they know what peace with Israel has meant. They know that since 1979, there has been a durable peace with Israel, that Israel has never violated the terms of that agreement, and that its foreign policy is basically, if you don't do what the Palestinians did on October 7, invade its territory, commit atrocities against its people, literally steal its people, then Israel will be a dependable ally. But if you wage war against it, then they will fight you and they will win against you. And so, you know, in the Middle East, they know the realities much better than we do here in the West. They have no appetite for this sort of nonsense. And that was a very good representation of it there.